If you click this video, you already know something is wrong. Not wrong with your willpower, not wrong with your effort, wrong with what you have been told about that fat sitting deep inside your belly, the kind that does not jiggle, the kind that does not respond to crunches, the kind that wraps itself around your organs and quietly drives every health problem your doctor keeps warning you about. You have been told losing it takes months. You have been told it is just what happens after 60. Both of those things are wrong. And in the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly why and what people your age are doing instead that is already working in days, not months. Because gone in days is not a promise I made lightly. It is what happens when you stop targeting the wrong thing and start working with how your body actually burns fat after 60. Stay with me, because what comes next is going to completely change how you understand your own belly. Picture this. You wake up in the morning. Before you even sit up, you can feel the tightness. Not pain exactly, just that pressure around the middle. The firmness that was not there 10 years ago. You get dressed and the waistband is snug again, not because you ate badly last night. It has just been like that. And here's what nobody told you. That firmness is not regular fat. That is visceral fat. And it behaves completely differently from the fat you can pinch on the outside. Visceral fat lives inside the abdominal cavity, packed between your organs, your liver, your intestines, your pancreas. It is metabolically active, which means it is constantly releasing inflammatory molecules into your bloodstream 24 hours a day. That is why people with high visceral fat tend to feel tired even after rest. That is why blood sugar becomes harder to control. That is why the belly stays firm even when the rest of the body loses weight. Is this sounding familiar? Because if it is, keep watching. What you are about to learn is specifically for you. Now, here is what I want you to understand before we go any further. This is not your fault. Your body changed. The way it stores and releases fat changed with it. And no one explained the new rules to you. But here's the part that is going to surprise you. Visceral fat is actually the first fat your body burns when given the right signal. It is not the last. It is the first. And that signal can be activated faster than most people think. That is what gone in days means. Not that it all disappears overnight, but that your body starts pulling from it within the first few days, sometimes the first 48 hours, when you change one specific variable that most people over 60 are getting completely wrong. I spoke to Margaret. She is 69 years old, retired teacher, lives in Ohio. She had been carrying what her doctor called a metabolically active belly for almost 8 years. She tried cutting calories. She walked every morning. She gave up bread for 6 months. The belly stayed. At week 2 of what I am going to share with you today, she said, and I want you to hear this in her words, the waistband on my slacks was loose for the first time in years. Not a little. I had to use a different belt hole 2 weeks. That is visceral fat responding the way it is supposed to respond when the right approach is used. Now, before I tell you exactly what that approach is, I need to tell you about the 3 mistakes that keep most people over 60 from ever getting there. Because I promise you, at least one of these is the reason what you have tried before did not work. Stay with me, because mistake number 3 is the one almost no one talks about, and is the most common one I see. Block 1. Why visceral fat ignores everything you have tried. Let me explain the biology first, because once you understand this, everything else clicks into place. After 60, your body undergoes a significant hormonal shift. Estrogen drops in women, testosterone declines in men, Cortisol, the stress hormone, tends to run higher and stay elevated longer than it did in your 30s. And visceral fat has cortisol receptors all over it. It responds to cortisol like a sponge. The higher and more persistent your cortisol, the more efficiently your body deposits fat in that deep abdominal area. What this means for you is that calorie cutting alone, which raises cortisol, can actually make visceral fat worse, not better. A study published in 2021 followed 312 adults over the age of 62 through a 12-week structured intervention. The group that focused exclusively on caloric restriction showed a modest reduction in overall body weight, but their visceral fat measurements taken by imaging barely moved. The group that combined a specific dietary timing strategy with targeted movement showed a 31% reduction in visceral fat volume in 12 weeks. 31% in 12 weeks. Not because they worked harder, because they worked differently. Here is what makes this even more important for you specifically. Visceral fat is not just a storage problem, it is an endocrine organ. It produces its own hormones. One of them is called resistin, which directly interferes with your body's ability to use insulin properly. Another is called interleukin 6, an inflammatory signal that circulates in your blood and contributes to joint pain, fatigue, and brain fog. So when people your age tell me they feel stiff in the morning, they feel tired by early afternoon, they cannot think as clearly as they used to, and their belly has been growing even though their diet has not changed. I recognize all of those things as visceral fat symptoms, not age, visceral fat. That distinction matters because symptoms of age feel permanent. Symptoms of visceral fat respond to the right approach, usually faster than you expect. Now that you understand why this happens, let me tell you about the first mistake, the one that keeps most people running in circles. Mistake number one, targeting the wrong kind of fat with the wrong kind of movement. Most people over 60 who are trying to lose belly fat are doing one of two things. They are doing long, steady cardio walks, which are wonderful for your heart and absolutely terrible for visceral fat reduction specifically. Or they are cutting calories, which, as we just covered, elevates cortisol and can actually signal the body to hold on to visceral fat even tighter. Neither of these is wrong for your health in general, but neither of them sends a specific signal that tells your body to release visceral fat. Here is what does. Visceral fat responds primarily to what researchers call metabolic disruption, brief periods of higher intensity effort followed by rest, combined with a reduction in the hormone insulin during certain hours of the day. The problem is that most 65 plus exercise advice still defaults to gentle and steady. And gentle and steady does not create the metabolic disruption that visceral fat responds to. Now, I want to be clear about something. I am not talking about high impact exercise. I am not talking about running or jumping or anything that puts stress on your joints. I am talking about a specific type of low impact effort that takes less than 15 minutes and can be done from a chair if needed. We will get to the exact protocol. But first, mistake number two. And this one is going to hit closer to home. Mistake number two, quitting just before the body starts to respond. Here is something that the research shows consistently and that almost no one is told at the doctor's office. Visceral fat does not give up the first week. It holds. Your body treats visceral fat as a reserve fuel. Almost like a savings account, it is reluctant to touch. In the first 7 to 10 days of any new approach, the body is testing whether this change is real or temporary. It burns other fuel first. It pulls from glycogen stores. It may pull from subcutaneous fat, the fat you can see and pinch. And if you quit before day 10 or 12, you never see the visceral response. Most people quit on day 8 because they have not seen results. And that is exactly 1 to 2 days before the body would have started releasing from the deep abdominal store. This is not about patience in the months long sense. I am not asking you to wait that long. I am asking you to understand the 10 to 12 day window and stay committed through it. Because what happens on day 12 and beyond is what Margaret experienced. Measurable change you can feel without a scale. A study from the University of Alabama, published in 2019, specifically tracked visceral fat response over time in adults aged 60 to 74. Their imaging data showed that the largest single-week drop in visceral fat volume consistently occurred between days 10 and 17 of the intervention, not days 1 through 7. Days 10 through 17, if you have tried something before and stopped in the first week, or 10 days because nothing seemed to be happening, this is your answer. You stopped at exactly the wrong moment. Now here is the third mistake. And I told you, this one is the most common. I want you to pay close attention. Mistake number 3, trying to do this alone without knowing your starting point. When people your age come to me and say they have tried everything, what I find almost universally is that they have been applying a general strategy to a specific body without understanding which specific signals their body actually needs. Visceral fat in a 67-year-old woman with a history of thyroid issues responds differently than visceral fat in a 71-year-old man whose cortisol has been chronically elevated for years. The approach has to match the starting point. And most people never figure out their starting point, so they keep trying general solutions and getting no results. This is why the research consistently shows that supervised or structured protocols outperform self-directed ones for this age group. Not because you are not capable of following a plan, but because the plan needs to account for where your hormones are right now, how your sleep is, what your stress levels look like, and how your body has been eating and moving. None of that is complicated once someone maps it for you. But without that map, you are essentially driving without knowing where you are starting from. The good news is that understanding your starting point takes less than 48 hours once you know what to look at. And I am going to give you the framework today that most people only get in a clinical consultation. Comment belly below if reducing visceral fat is your main goal right now. Comment energy below if the fatigue and brain fog that come with it are what you most want back. I read every comment, and your answer is going to shape what I create next. Block 2, what actually drops visceral fat fast and the mechanism behind it. Now let me give you the real framework. The one that combines what the most current research shows with what I have seen actually working for people your age. There are 3 levers for visceral fat, and you need all 3 running together, even briefly, to trigger the release. Pull one without the others, and the body stays locked. The first lever is insulin management. Visceral fat is exquisitely sensitive to insulin. When insulin is high, visceral fat does not release. It cannot. Insulin essentially locks the fat cells in storage mode. This is why people who eat frequently throughout the day, even healthy foods, often struggle specifically with visceral fat. Their insulin never drops low enough for long enough to open the release valve. The most effective strategy for managing this lever after 60 is a form of time-restricted eating, not aggressive fasting that stresses the body. A simple window, typically 14 to 16 hours overnight, where you are not eating, which is often as simple as stopping eating after dinner at 7 and not eating again until 9 or 10 the next morning. During that window, insulin drops naturally. Visceral fat begins to mobilize. A study published in Cell Metabolism in 2022 followed adults aged 60 to 80 using a 14-hour overnight window. At 8 weeks, their visceral fat markers had dropped significantly, more than a comparison group eating the same calories spread throughout the day. Same calories, different timing, very different outcomes in the belly specifically. The second lever is cortisol management. Remember, visceral fat has cortisol receptors. When cortisol is high and stays high throughout the day, those receptors actively pull fat back into storage, even when other hormones are trying to release it. The cortisol pattern in most people over 60 is what researchers call blunted diurnal rhythm. Normally, cortisol should be high in the morning to wake you up and low by evening to let you sleep. In many older adults, this rhythm flattens. Cortisol runs moderately elevated throughout the day and evening, which means visceral fat is constantly receiving a signal to hold. What disrupts this? Two things that are accessible to almost anyone. The first is morning light exposure within 30 minutes of waking, which helps reset the cortisol curve toward a proper diurnal pattern. The second is a brief, specific breathwork practice that activates the parasympathetic nervous system and directly suppresses cortisol release. Slow nasal exhales that are twice as long as your inhales. Practice for just 5 to 7 minutes. Lower cortisol measurably within 20 minutes of practice. Neither of these is complicated. Neither requires a gym or a prescription. But most people have never been told that cortisol management is a prerequisite for visceral fat release. The third lever is metabolic activation through brief targeted movement. Here's a specific protocol that is supported by the research and adapted for people over 60 who may have joint limitations. It is called the 15-minute activation window, and it works like this. Once per day, ideally in the morning before your first meal while insulin is still low from the overnight window, you perform a series of low-impact movements for 15 minutes. These are not aerobic exercise in the traditional sense. They are resistance-based movements using your own body weight that create what researchers call EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Your body continues burning at an elevated rate for up to 6 hours after 15 minutes of this kind of movement. The movements can be done seated or standing. A seated version includes slow resistance band pulls, seated marches with deliberate core engagement, and wall pushes. A standing version includes slow wall squats held for 10 seconds, standing hip hinges, and standing calf raises with a 3-second hold at the top. The key is the slow tempo and the deliberate contraction. You are not rushing through repetitions. You are squeezing and holding, which activate the larger muscle groups, the quadriceps, the glutes, the back, and creates the hormonal signal that tells visceral fat it is time to be used as fuel. Robert, 72 years old, retired firefighter from Colorado. He had been diabetic for 6 years, and his doctor had been warning him about his visceral fat readings for the last 4. He started the 15-minute morning protocol combined with the overnight eating window. At day 9, he noticed his fasting blood sugar, which he tracks with the home monitor, had dropped by 12 points without any medication change. At week 3, his pants were visibly looser. At his 2-month check-in, his doctor reduced one of his medications. Robert did not run. He did not go to the gym. He pulled the 3 levers in the right order at the right time with patience for the 10 to 12 day window. That is what this looks like in practice. Block 3, the full protocol, and why you can start today. Let me now give you this in the clearest, most actionable form possible. Because understanding why is important, but knowing exactly what to do next is what changes things. Day 1 through 10, your job is to establish the three levers simultaneously. Do not add one at a time. All three together is what creates the synergy that moves visceral fat. First, the overnight eating window. Stop eating 2 to 3 hours before bed. Do not eat again until at least 14 hours after your last meal. If you stop at 7 p.m., do not eat until 9 a.m. You can drink water, black coffee, and plain tea. Nothing else during that window. This does not require starving. It requires timing. Second, morning light and cortisol reset. Within 30 minutes of waking, spend 10 minutes outside or near a window with natural light. Even on cloudy days, outdoor light is dramatically more effective than indoor lighting for resetting your cortisol curve. If mobility limits getting outside, sit by a large window facing east. Pair this with your 5 to 7 minute breathing practice. Breathe in for 4 counts through the nose. Breathe out for 8 counts through the nose. Repeat for 5 to 7 minutes. This takes less than 10 minutes total, and the research on its impact on cortisol is consistent and clear. Third, the 15-minute activation protocol. Before your first meal, while insulin is still at its overnight low, complete your 15 minutes of slow resistance movement. Choose seated or standing based on your current ability. The specific movements matter less than the principle: slow tempo, deliberate contraction, large muscle groups. Aim for movements you can do with control, not speed. Now, here is the part that people most often ask about. What do you eat when you do break the fast? The answer is simpler than most diet advice you have heard. When you eat, prioritize protein at every meal. Not protein shakes or supplements necessarily, though those can help. Real food protein, eggs, Greek yogurt, chicken, fish, legumes. Protein does 2 things that are critical here. It keeps insulin lower than carbohydrates do, which supports the first lever. And it preserves lean muscle mass, which is the engine that burns visceral fat over time. For people over 60, the research consistently shows that protein needs are actually higher than for younger adults, not lower, because the body becomes less efficient at using dietary protein with age. The target is approximately 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. If you weigh 160 pounds, that is roughly 73 kilograms, meaning you need around 88 to 117 grams of protein daily. That is not as hard to reach as it sounds. 3 eggs at breakfast is about 18 grams. A palm-sized piece of salmon at lunch is around 30 grams. Greek yogurt in the afternoon is 15 to 20 grams. A portion of chicken or legumes at dinner adds another 25 to 30. You can reach that target eating real food comfortably within a reasonable window. Now, there is one more thing I want you to know, something that most discussions of visceral fat completely leave out: sleep. Deep, restorative sleep is not a passive activity. During slow wave sleep, the body releases growth hormone, which directly signals visceral fat to break down. This is not a minor effect. A study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine found that adults who slept 5.5 hours versus 8.5 hours, even while eating the same amount, lost 60% less fat. And the reduction in visceral fat specifically was dramatic in the better sleeping group. If your sleep is disrupted, fragmented, or short, you are fighting visceral fat with one arm tied behind your back. Improving sleep quality is not optional if reducing visceral fat is your goal. The good news is that the overnight eating window, the breathing practice, and the morning lights exposure all support better sleep quality directly. These levers reinforce each other. That is why pulling all three at once works faster than pulling anyone alone. Bonus tip: the one thing you can do today. Before you go, I promised you something you can do right now. Tonight, set a time for your last meal. Write it down, put it in your phone, then set an alarm for 14 hours later and call that your first meal tomorrow. That is it. That is a one action. You do not need to change what you eat today. You do not need to buy anything. You just need to create the window. Because tomorrow morning, when you wake up and 14 hours have passed since you last ate, your insulin will be lower than it has been in a long time. And that is the moment before you eat anything that the door to visceral fat opens. Most people walk right past that door every morning by eating the moment they wake up. Starting tomorrow, you're going to stand in front of it and use the other two levers to walk through. Rosemary, 68 years old, grandmother of 4, lives in Arizona. She started with just the eating window and the morning breathing practice, no other changes. At day 11, she sent a message that said, "I do not know what is happening, but my belly feels different. Softer in the morning, less pressure. I had forgotten what that felt like." That was day 11, not month 3, day 11. Closing. Small steps repeated over weeks create the kind of change you can actually feel. You do not need to do anything extreme. You do not need to suffer through it. You just need to pull the right levers in the right order with the understanding of why they work. If this video helped you understand something that no one has explained to you before, hit like right now. It takes 1 second and it helps someone else your age find this information instead of spending another year trying things that were never designed for their body. Comment belly if visceral fat is your main target. Comment energy if the fatigue and fog that come with it are what you want back most. I read all of them. And your answers are shaping the next video, which goes even deeper into what happens inside the body between weeks 2 and 4, and why that window is where the real change happens. Subscribe so you do not miss it. And if you know someone, a partner, a sibling, a close friend who has been struggling with the same stubborn belly that does not respond, share this with them today. You might be giving them something their doctor has not had time to explain. It is not too late. And you do not have to wait long to feel the difference.